wonderful to see you collectively, and it's also been great fun for me to meet some of my professional colleagues in one form or another. I'm not going to try to shout out too many of the people who are here, but this is a very distinguished group, I should say, in the climate and energy space. Maybe that's not a surprise given who we're talking to, but it's really exciting to see all of these faces and so many of you in particular. I'm Jim Stock. I'm the Vice Provost for Climate and Sustainability. I'm also the Director of the Salata Institute. You'll hear a little bit more about the Salata Institute today, but hopefully what you'll mainly hear about is what's going on in climate and sustainability. So in a general sense. Okay, so I'm going to start off with a question, which is why work on climate now at Harvard? So let me unpack that a little bit. So I'm going to start on that. I'm going to talk about that in at three different levels. So let's take the first four words. Why work on climate? I think that it's in the noise of the current moment. It's easy to forget that we have long-term problems and long-term challenges that we need to tackle, but we must not. We can't forget that. Just take a look at the wildfires in Canada that are happening and have happened recently, the other changes, we've blown through 1.5 degrees. So the various changes that are happening right now are sort of as one would expect and as are predicted, and they're only going to be getting worse. Moreover, I think you can argue, this is something I believe, that a lot of our political problems stem from challenges of the energy transition, perhaps the energy transition not being handled particularly astutely or particularly well. And that creates a lot of internal frictions in the course of this transition. And that is certainly one of the underlying themes of the current political moment. And that poses a huge amount of challenges as well. Why do it now? Okay, so the next question is, why work on climate now? Well, frankly, who else is going to? It's not going to be done. I mean, the universities, all climate grants are being cut back. Harvard's 100% of our grants have been cut back from the feds. But throughout climate, those climate grants are all being cut back, whether it's at a university or an NGO or anywhere else. That work is being discontinued in the federal government. Does that mean that it's unimportant? No, that's why I work on climate. So these are important things to continue, and that's a critical challenge, and it's important things to continue at universities. Universities have this unique position, almost unique in society, of ability to take the long view. So we're not elected every 4 years. We are not issuing quarterly reports to shareholders. We're able to think about long histories and long legacies. And as we think into the deeper future, whether that's 10 years or 20 years or 50 years, it's incumbent on us. We have the responsibility to work on challenges that will really will work on making the world a better place for our children and for the next generation of leaders and citizens across the entire political spectrum. And I guess the final piece of this question is why at Harvard? So certainly the easy thing for Harvard to do at the moment would be to say, we're under, we can't focus on climate, we can't focus on other stuff, we're just gonna focus on making it through this moment. But that's not the right thing to do. That's not what we need to be doing as Harvard. This is an opportunity. First of all, we have tremendous resources, and you're seeing a lot of those resources here in this room, resources in terms of intellectual capital and connections and ability to think creatively about the important challenges that we face today. We have the ability to call people together, and I would say we also have the responsibility to do that, and we have a responsibility to lead. We're not seeing as much leadership in the private and the nonprofit space as we were 4 months ago or 8 months ago, that's for sure. Somebody has to be able to do that. And I think we've crossed that Rubicon. So that's an area that we feel a responsibility to act as well and to really drive forward work. So let me tell you a little bit about what Harvard is doing and what we are doing here at the Salata Institute. So super briefly about the Salata Institute. We are at the center of the university, so I report to the provost, or the Salata Institute reports up to the provost and the president. And so that means we get to work across all of the different schools, drive research, teaching, and engagement across all of the different schools. We also, a fundamental part of it, over half of our budget is spent on faculty research, well over half of our budget is spent on faculty research, faculty and graduate student research. And we have a huge amount of activities, some of which you'll hear about today, a slice of which you'll hear about today. So this is just a small component of them. The ladder there is in the Harvard Forest. The Harvard Forest has an important role in biodiversity, has an important role in measurement of plant physiology and also in biodiversity. We're rolling out or building up a biodiversity and planetary stewardship initiative. We're doing work on the upper right-hand corner there. We're doing work on EV charging. We're doing work on reducing methane emissions, and you're going to hear Rob Stavins talk about that. We're doing work in the lower right-hand corner on adaptation strategies, and this is in particular from a cluster that's supported by the Salata Institute, working on heat strategies, heat management strategies in South Asia. So we sit at the center of the university. We do a lot of different projects. The projects are driven by faculty interests and also by our ability to scale. So as I think about how we choose projects, where do we choose to put our resources? I think about the priorities that I set can be boiled down to a simple sentence. And I say this sentence my staff knows a few times a day, which is it's all about tons and lives. So how are we going to reduce emissions efficiently and durably and over the long run? And how are we going to save lives and make communities more resilient and prevent the damages that are going to happen, prevent the damages from being as serious as they might be from climate change. So it's about adaptation and mitigation and about preserving biodiversity and understanding all of those issues. But it's about doing things that actually make a practical difference, things that we can actually do to drive change. So we're doing some new initiatives. You'll hear about some ongoing things today. We're doing some new initiatives too. One of our initiatives in the United States is focusing on building out a clean grid in the face of increasing demand. And we have some really talented folks, one of which is on the panel, one of which is sitting right there. Laji is a professor who was, I think, the only power systems engineer in Cambridge, is what I'm told, which is a pretty important part of building out the grid. We're also working in lots of different dimensions. Another dimension in which we're working is in building durable climate solutions. So I think one can make the argument that, let's say, however you describe climate policy in the United States, durable is probably not a word that would spring off your lips. But on the other hand, the climate problem is a durable problem, and we need policies that are going to match the timescales and duration and seriousness and ability to scale of the climate problem. How can one build out durable climate policies? So this is an ongoing through line, if you will, of a lot of the work in the policy space that we're doing at the Institute. We're not advocates. We're not out there lobbying anybody, but we're happy to, do research that is informed by the needs of the various communities and to try to come up with creative solutions. And if there is a big challenge, it's how do we depoliticize climate and how do we move it into a central solution? I mean, I work on EVs, and there's so many times that I just shake my head and I think, how can buying an EV be a political act? My wife is a big bicyclist, and she was trying to decide what kind of bicycle. I kind of like mountain biking more, and she likes road biking. That didn't feel very political, Like you buy a mountain bike or a road bike? I don't know, like somehow EV is. It's weird. Okay. We're going to have insights today from our panel that are going to be able to provide us with a variety of different things. So the order in which they were speaking, let me introduce them. We got Rob Stavins. He's the A.J. Meyer Professor of Energy and Economic Development. He's the director of the Harvard the Harvard Environmental Economics Program and the Harvard Project on Climate Agreements. Over the past 30 years, he's produced many, if not most, of all of the environmental economists in captivity. Today, he will be He'll be talking in his capacity as the principal investigator for the Salata Institute Climate Research Cluster on Methane Emissions. Dr. Mary Rice is the director of the Center for Climate Health and the Global Environment, or Sea Change, and the Mark and Catherine Winkler Associate Professor of Environmental Respiratory Health at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. She's a pulmonary critical care physician and the director of the Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center Institute for Lung Health. Her center, Sea Change, is one of the core school center affiliates of the Salata Institute. And today she will be talking about the work being done at Sea Change in climate and health. Steve Ansolabehere is the Frank G. Thompson Professor of Government and FAS. He's an expert in public opinion and elections, and he's published extensively on elections, mass media and representation, political economy, and public opinion, especially concerning energy and the environment. He's also the co-PI, co-principal investigator for this new initiative I mentioned in the Salata Institute on building out a clean power grid to meet the increasing demand from AI and electrification. And he'll be talking about that. So we're going to give these folks 7 minutes to talk about their work, and then we're going to open up to Q&A. So I have explicitly asked them not to talk about the current challenges at Harvard, but to focus on the work that we're doing now. That doesn't mean we're not interested in those questions, and those might be on your mind. And feel free to ask questions about any of those. And if I need to put on my vice provost hat, I think I brought it with me. So, Rob, it's up to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Jim. Pleasure to be with all of you. It's always wonderful to be with alumni. One of the reasons is that quite a few of you were students of mine as early as 1989. I want to hasten to add that when I joined the faculty in 1989, I was 6 years old. I want to be clear about that. So my topic is based upon one of the research clusters of the Salata Institute for Climate and Sustainability. It's on reducing global methane emissions. So why focus on reducing global methane emissions? We all hear a lot more about carbon dioxide, of course, and climate change. Methane's received much less attention. The major reason is because the absolute quantities of molecules of methane that are going into the atmosphere from anthropogenic activities are vastly less than those of CO2. Also, CO2 remains in the atmosphere much longer. The half-life is over 100 years. Even when you get to 1,000 years, there is still some there. Whereas in the case of methane, almost all of it is out of the atmosphere within 10 to 12 years. On the other hand, per unit, per molecule, methane is much more effective in driving climate change. It has very high global warming potential per unit. So if we look over a 100-year period, then each methane unit is about 28 times as effective in causing radiative forcing in climate change. If we're looking over 20 years, then it's 84 times as effective. Or to eliminate those arbitrary distinctions, just think historically, since the beginning of industrialization, what share of climate change, of global warming, is due to methane? And the answer is about 30%. So it's exceptionally important. The result of these differences with the time periods is that methane emissions abatement can very significantly reduce greenhouse gas concentrations, climate change, and damages, particularly in the short term. And that's very important because that can give us time to bend the curve on CO2 emissions, to conduct research on carbon mitigation and removal, and to implement longer-term strategies to mitigate and indeed, if necessary, adapt to climate change. So in 2023, we launched a Harvard-wide initiative on reducing global methane emissions. Again, it's one of what were then 5, now more, research clusters of the Salata Institute. Our goal is simply to achieve meaningful and sustained progress on methane emissions reduction through research and effective engagement with key stakeholders. to deliver information from that research that's going to help with the design and implementation of emission reduction policies and programs. So no, we're not engaged in advocacy, but we are very much engaged in communicating with everyone relevant outside of academia, both to learn from them and also to convey the results of our work. So this initiative, and I would say actually all Harvard climate research and outreach, is, as Jim suggested, now more important than it's ever been because of the federal government's political abandonment of climate research and policies. And indeed, in the methane sphere, there are massive opportunities right now for substantial progress. So this initiative brings together 24 researchers, including Harvard faculty from across the university and some external collaborators. We've got 7 departments from the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, 5 professional schools, disciplines ranging from physics to history. And by working together as we do, by collaborating, we can and have indeed made the whole greater than the sum of its parts. You're a Harvard crowd, so you may find it surprising. People from other institutions wouldn't, but we have faculty members from across the university, from different professional schools, from FAS, from different departments, collaborating, cooperating on this important work. And we're translating this research into useful materials. Every time a faculty member publishes an article from the research, which is going to go into a scholarly journal, in fact, what will happen is that we will produce instead, in addition to that, we'll produce a very user-friendly 2-page summary. Also videos, meetings with government, NGOs, and business leaders. Now, in the first year of the initiative, we had 7 research projects. These are research and outreach projects going, including satellite observations of atmospheric methane, and also a project working on estimating abatement costs. In the second and third year, we've added 15 more projects going beyond the oil and gas sector, looking also at agriculture, waste, and landfill sources, and extending the work beyond the United States, importantly including China. So it's some very important work with colleagues in China and in Singapore. We also have a whole set of additional projects in the oil and gas sector. And importantly, we have 2 initiatives which are across all sectors. And one of them I'll mention is advancing methane entrepreneurship. I highlight that because Peter Tufano, who is going to follow us after we finish this panel, is in fact directing that particular project within our methane initiative. So in terms of the path ahead, this review, I don't mean it to be complete. It's not exhaustive. We're only now at the end of the second of a 3-year time horizon for the project. We anticipate that more Harvard faculty and importantly more students will become participant, and we also expect more external individual collaborators and more collaborating institutions. Finally, I want to emphasize at the end what I said at the beginning, and that is that the importance, indeed the urgency, in my view, of this initiative and others on climate policy is particularly pressing now, given domestic U.S. politics and the implications of that for inaction and lack of progress at the international level. The need for rigorous university-based research has never been greater than it is right now, in particular to develop new strategies to reduce methane emissions. And I anticipate that as we have over the last 2 years, in the future going forward, Harvard will continue to show global leadership in this realm. I'll close with a thank you, and then available to you are some websites if you want more information. If you'd like to be on yet another email distribution list, give me a business card afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here speaking to you all today. Thank you so much for coming. A little bit about myself. As Jim Stock mentioned, I'm a physician. I see patients. And as of October of 2024, I've been the director of Sea Change at the Harvard Chan School of Public Health. I also have an appointment at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, where I founded an Institute for Lung Health focused on preventable causes of respiratory illness with a focus on air pollution. And in October of 2024, I was appointed to be the physician member of the Clean Air Scientific Advisory Committee that advises the US EPA on clean air standards, and then was promptly fired along with the rest of the committee in January. So a little bit about Sea Change. This center is almost 30 years old. It was founded in 1996 by two physicians, Eric Shivian and the late Paul Epstein. And it was the first such center at a medical school. In 1997, they published this full-page ad in the New York Times, signed by over 400 physicians and health professionals, warning about the health effects of climate change should it go on unchecked. It moved to the Harvard Chan School in 2012 and was renamed Sea Change with the addition of the word climate by Gina McCarthy, who preceded me as director of Sea Change. Our goal is to be a global leader and a catalyst of solutions-oriented climate, pollution, and health research, and to engage students and trainees through climate and health education and research mentorship by faculty across departments, not only at the School of Public Health and at the medical school, but university-wide in partnership with the Salata Institute. Here's a visual of our structure. I've assembled a really, in my mind, brilliant multidisciplinary team of experts who bring in different perspectives on the climate and health problem. We have expertise in infectious diseases, in nutrition and planetary health, in emergency care, primary care, pediatrics, cost-benefit analysis for climate and health policy, and also importantly, implementation science, the social science of what actually works in the real world. What are the barriers to implementing those solutions? And more broadly, we have affiliated faculty, more than 70. You'd be surprised how much work is happening at Harvard. These are mostly faculty from the Harvard affiliated hospitals and Harvard Med School and Harvard School of Public Health, but other schools as well. And we have visiting scholars from around the world. And Sea Change is functioning as a home for all of us to get together, share ideas. So here's a picture of one of our community gatherings where we bring together our students, our faculty, and our community partners. And I'll be telling you about some of our community-based research. So I'm focusing our work in 4 areas of impact: individuals, questions around what patients can do to protect themselves; healthcare systems, how the healthcare system can be more prepared for climate disasters; communities and cities to improve their resilience; and also informing national and global policy. I'm going to start with some examples of individual level work that we do. I'm an air pollution researcher and a pulmonologist, and I think a really key point is climate change is an air quality problem in many ways. It promotes the formation of ozone smog, which is enhanced on hot sunny days like we're having today. It extends and amplifies the pollen season. Wildfires, the wildfire season is longer than it used to be, and as we're all aware, we've experienced a dramatic increase in devastating wildfire events. And the sources of combustion that emit carbon dioxide also emit deadly air pollution. One such intervention study that I lead is a randomized controlled trial of air purifiers. We enrolled almost 180 people with chronic lung disease and have followed each one of them for almost a year. We're in the final 6 months of this study. This is an NIH-funded study, so it is one where the funding has been taken away, but we are going to find a way to finish this trial and get answers for the sake of the participants. Again. And for clinical care, because doctors need to know if this is an effective intervention or not that we can prescribe. Beat the Heat is another NIH-funded study. that we're now going to do in a slightly smaller scale to get us through this summer. Again, we're not going to stop, but it's focused on bringing heat solutions to low-income communities in Boston. Healthcare system work. We've done a fair amount of research evaluating, developing and then evaluating resources for clinics and hospitals to help protect their patients from climate-related hazards. At the community level, this is work by Amruta Nori Sarma, who is the Deputy Director of Sea Change, an environmental epidemiologist, and she looked at heat and admissions for mental health causes, and she looked specifically at the most vulnerable people with chronic mental health conditions who are poor and who are served through community crisis units. And she found that the relationship between heat and hospitalization for mental health was dramatically steeper. The slope of that relationship was much greater than what had been published for commercially insured results. And at the same time, she talked to community members to understand what are some of the barriers to getting cooling for these vulnerable adults. And they found from the police that the cooling centers are too far for their clients in crisis. The doctor said, well, these high-risk folks would probably be seen as loiterers if they're hanging out in the cooling centers. And the patients themselves said, oh, I didn't even know there were cooling centers. And, I don't think I'd feel welcome there. Really important barriers that need to be overcome if we're going to reach these populations. Also work by Amruta. It was an EPA-funded grant looking at climate and chemical stressors in the Mystic watershed and developing a tool so that communities can understand what are the greatest risks so they can start developing plans. And I think it's no surprise, Boston was ready for blizzards. It was built for blizzards. It wasn't built for heat waves. We have work in Los Angeles targeting the communities there that were devastated by the LA fires and sharing the data that we find with the public online on the lafire.com website. This work is led by Kari Nadeau. And lastly, national global policy work. So a lot of our research is looking at relationships of hazards and health outcomes and trying to share them in a way that is useful for policymakers. This is work led by Chris Golden in Madagascar, using big data to identify risks and health outcomes in Madagascar. This is work by Amruta Nori Sarma, Joel Schwartz, and others, mapping particulate matter and temperature across India in a way that policymakers can use. And here you can see how it's available publicly. And in the United States, here, as we've seen, wildfire smoke patterns are really changing. Today is a perfect example of it. Particulate matter levels are high, higher than normal. And that's in part due to wildfires. And here you can see the pattern of how it's really affecting us across the country. This was published just last week by one of the Sea Change faculty, looking at estimating the attributable mortality from climate-induced wildfire risk, and found that 10% of the wildfire smoke PM deaths were attributable to climate change, 14,800 deaths over 15 years at a cost of $10.6 billion. And this work, the goal of a lot of this work is not just to identify problems, but to develop solutions. And so we're doing a lot of work taking these quantifications of health effects and using them to inform policies that can help the public. So thank you so much for your time. I look forward to the Q&A.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to class. Last time I taught in this room was a class on climate change for our undergraduates. I taught it with Dustin Tingley, and I see a couple students of mine here, which is great to see you guys back. I have been working since 2001 as kind of a sidelight on energy and climate issues. My main gig is studying public opinion and elections. I work for CBS News on election night, calling the elections, pretty data intensive occupation. But what I've gotten involved with through colleagues here and at MIT is thinking about how communities, kind of local areas, shape and are affected by changing energy systems. And you can think about some of those communities like Houston, Texas. Houston is got the double whammy. They're going to be affected pretty seriously by climate change and all the things you just heard about from Mary, heat waves, storms, and so forth. But they're also hugely dependent on the oil and gas industry for their financial well-being. New Mexico is another great example, something I'd not really thought about until I started looking closely at the state, which is they have a huge amount of state revenue from oil and gas extraction from the Permian Basin. And if you get rid of gas, you get rid of all the funding for public education and public health in the state of New Mexico. So many states, many communities are going to get hit with these sort of double effects of climate change. And we need to think about how to deal with things at that community level. And electricity systems, we think, are going to be central to that. Electricity demand in the United States is about to increase dramatically, and it is driven by data. And what I mean by that is there's been, over the past 25 years, the growth of electricity demand and supply has been pretty steady at about 1%, maybe a little less. And by that, you can think about like how many power lines are built, how much generation capacity, how much demand. It's all been really pretty flat. And that's remarkably different from the prior 150 years where electricity demand was increasing really fast in the United States and in the Western Hemisphere generally. But electricity demand is starting to accelerate, and it's projected that it's going to grow nationally at least 4% a year. Now, 4% doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a lot if you've been growing at 1%. And a lot of that growth is driven by data. It's driven by computing and data centers. And it's not very nationalized. It's highly localized. Let me tell you a little story that I'll share from a meeting that Le had organized. This is a city in Nebraska. They built a data center in this city. And when they built the data center, the construction of the data center said, we'll need about half of the electricity your city currently uses. The city said, okay. 5 years later, the data center came back to the city and said, we need to increase our supply. It's like, okay, how much demand, how much load do you want to consume? And the data center said, all of it, right? That is the problem that Iowa faces and Virginia faces and Georgia faces, and many of you in different places are starting to hear those stories. Those stories are going to get chronic. They're going to be everywhere as we increase our use of data centers, and especially the AI revolution. The AI revolution is going to cause electricity demand to pop in the United States and in any place that has power. So Wyoming, so Nebraska, Iowa, and so forth, very desirable places to put generating centers for and storage centers for data. The problem is going to be that this is a big shock that's going to cause a lack of supply. We don't have enough localized energy supply to meet that demand. The first problem is going to be who pays. So currently, the electricity system is a massive cross-subsidy from commercial and industrial users to residential users. You don't see your rates go up so much because the Public Utility Commission is shielding you. But when you see rapid increases, what's going to happen? How much are rates of residential users going to increase? Is it going to cause industry and commercial development to slow down as they have to pay higher rates? Second problem is what happens if there's a Texas-sized problem? That is, bad weather causes some sort of catastrophic failure of your electricity system. You're isolated. This happened in 2021. And you have to like start shutting things down in the electricity system just to maintain stable power. Who's going to get shut down? The hospital or the data center? They're going to be critical choices. And we've even heard these in recent meetings at SEAS. And the third aspect of this is carbon emissions. Are we going to turn coal power plants back on to meet rapid increases in electricity demand? Second reason to think about this is decarbonization is going to accelerate electricity demand. And in particular, decarbonization is going to, electricity is the natural path to decarbonization. if we can decarbonize electricity, we can get rid of fossil fuels in the transportation sector once we have EVs. If we decarbonize electricity, we can get rid of fossil fuels in the industrials once we have electric arc furnaces for steel and so forth. So it's the natural path to do this, decarbonize electricity and then electrify the end use. This is the electricity challenge as we see it, which is, can we develop both the utilization technologies and the electricity infrastructure to serve this need to decarbonize and to avoid some of the problems that are happening because of the rapid increase in electricity demand? The questions are, what gets built, where, and how it's used? And those are social science problems. Those are political problems. Those are economic problems. So this activity at Harvard is really at the intersection of Cs and social sciences and graduate school of design, because a lot of built environment is at stake as well. What is Harvard doing in this space? Well, you can think of the electricity system as having four big pieces that all line up. There's the generation of power, there's the transmission of power, those are the big long distance power lines. There's the distribution of power, which is actually a marketplace and it's a mess. And then there's the utilization of power. We have invested in all four areas. In terms of the generation of power, Mike Aziz's lab is focusing on how do you reduce carbon emissions from electricity production and other things like petrochemical production. The decarbonization of transmission is an increasing area of study, especially among my group, which has been working on how do you do assessment of the grid and how do you decarbonize the grid. The distribution sector is very much at stake with the group that Leshy is running, the power and AI section, and also the Harvard Electricity Policy Group. And then the decarbonization of utilization is a new research cluster that Harvard has just, the Salata Institute just created on the built environment and how to decarbonize houses and the distribution of electricity inside urban areas. I'll open it up. I think we'll open it up to questions about this, but I just want to reflect on one thing that's unique about what Harvard is doing, which is not only are we engaging in research, but we're also engaging in the stakeholders through the Electricity Policy Group, through the Power and AI Initiative, to bring the industry, interest groups, NGOs, researchers all together to discuss these problems, to think through them. Because it's not only the case that we're trying to shape the world through ideas, but we're also really receptive to the problems as they're described by the community, by the people who are working in public health, by the people who are working in the power sector, in terms of knowing what are the problems and how can we effectively address them. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Steve. So I think I just want to underscore something what Steve ended on, which is that each one of these, like most of what we do actually, is something that really draws on the strengths of Harvard, which is this deep expertise across all of these different areas. One of the things that's been lacking prior to the Institute is the ability to coordinate and to communicate and to bring people to work together on similar problems. And so that's what's happening now. And I think we're going to see lots more progress coming out of all of that, the good work that's being done at Harvard as a result of keeping an eye on the ball, tons and lives, and also really working together so that we can bring together the strengths of the different schools and the different researchers. So I'm just going to call on you as we go. I bet there's lots of questions. Please introduce yourself. In the back, you had your hand up. No, behind you. Yeah, there in the very last row was first, I think, in line. Okay, we have a couple of mics that we can run with, okay?
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Nadine Zarini, and my question is about water. So by 2050, water scarcity is projected to become a critical global issue with significant implications for both human populations and ecosystems. And with data centers being built all around the world to generate the power of AI, that's just going to escalate or accelerate the process. So how is the Salata Institute addressing water scarcity and quality issues?
So I'll be really quick about that because we don't have our experts here, but we have a couple of different projects that touch on that. I mean, you mentioned in the grid and AI, and certainly that is one area, but we actually have, you saw that in one of my slides, you saw that tower out at the Harvard Forest. And so there's a group that we're in the process of building and setting up. We've been doing so over the past year in what we call planetary stewardship, and water absolutely falls in that context. And I think you also saw some slides from Madagascar, and there's a team that's been working in Madagascar that Mary is familiar with and is associated with sea change, where that, of course, is one of the issues they're dealing with there. So it comes up in a number of different ways. Yeah, please. Nope, name first. Name first. And let's see to get a mic so that we can actually everyone can hear.
Yeah, Kurt Fried. So most of the wars of the 20th century were fighting over oil and gas. Basically, I understand that all the oil and gas we use is equivalent to 1 hour of 1 day of sunshine. Namely, the sun is our best hope. And those of us who have solar collectors on the roof say, yeah, that's it. Instead of the Iraq War, we could have put solar collectors on 50 million houses. So this is a solvable problem. Everyone says it's not continuous and all that. What about solar electric roof as a solution for the U.S. solar or electric problem?
I'm supposed to be directing these to the panel, but is there anyone want to jump in for that? But I mean, I think as a technical matter, so I think that's so interesting about that question is that as a technical matter, this is a solvable problem, for heaven's sakes. We have technologies that will be able to reduce 80%, 75% of our emissions. We're not using them. It's become a political challenge and a political schism. And we have a lot of just practical system problems in terms of the legal and institutional impediments in front of us. So I think it's possible to think of that. Geothermal is an enormous resource. There's other resources around. The question is, how do we actually take advantage of those and use those? And that's where we get into a lot of the really tough politics. Steve, I don't know whether you want to jump in.
Sure. There are two aspects of this problem. One is utility scale solar, which is like big solar farms, and the other is household scale solar. The utility scale solar challenge is how do you get the electricity from the utility scale plant, say in Arizona, to Los Angeles? And that requires building power lines. So the big obstacle is the power lines. And as Paul Joskow, our colleague at MIT, says, the problem with power lines is they're long and skinny. Right? They cross a lot of boundaries, and those jurisdictions along the way don't get anything out of it. So it becomes this huge negotiation over who's going to extract as much as they can from the developer. The other challenge is the local provision, and you highlighted a few things about reliability and so forth. But there's another kind of curious side problem, which is if you develop enough of that distributed power, it creates problems for the centralized provider, namely it's no longer profitable. So if you've got to have a gas generator to keep the power running when you don't have solar or don't have wind, but that's no longer profitable, you need to figure out how to maintain both systems at the same time. And it's hard, and that's created problems of transition. So if you transition a lot to that. Story from MIT from years ago in the 1970s, MIT wanted to stabilize its power generation in the city of Cambridge. And this was a time when the city had its own power generators because it was a city scale utility. They wanted to build a cogeneration plant on campus. Had they done that, they would have taken 40% of the electricity away from Cambridge Power and Electric. Cambridge Power and Electric refused to let them do that. So the authority rests not necessarily with the person who can do that. The deal in the end, MIT did build this so they could have stable power, but they had to give all of the excess power back to the city for free. So those are the kinds of struggles we're going to have as we try to go to more distributed systems.
Over there in the hat, in the far corner.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for speaking with us today. My name is Stephen Alias. I'm post-grad. My focus is on energy security. So just to add to the gentleman's comment, I think that one of the aspects we need to take into consideration is the lobbying power of oil and gas versus renewable energy. It's not a critique, it's just an observation. And then on another point, for the states that have energy power, right? The Texas, the Wyoming, you mentioned geothermal. What potential deprivations could come up to feed the competition between certain data centers, wherein Texas is stronger versus New Mexico in the fight over the Permian Basin, theoretically?
Thanks. Rob, do you want to jump in on the energy security bit?
Well, around the world, there are views in many countries, increasingly so, that energy is something that's so important that one should not rely on other countries and import energy. Sometimes that results in what, in my mind, as an economist, are misleading, misdirected policies, like trying to stop through a tariff regime low-cost, carbon-free hydroelectricity from Canada from coming into the United States. So in general, I think too much of the discussion about energy security has often been converted into thinking that it has to be that we produce it here. And I don't just mean the United States, I'm talking about other parts of the world as well. Now, it's true that electricity is not an internationally traded good to the degree that petroleum and natural gas and so many manufactured products are. But any situation in which we try to become an island economically and politically can lead to tremendous inefficiencies in the global economic system and unintentionally make us worse off.
Steve?
Do you want to continue, or we have a lot of questions?
Yeah, we have a lot of questions.
Okay.
Okay, so,
Going through
sure, yeah.
Hi, Bill Hauser. This question is for Stephen.
Hey.
How is climate change impacting public sentiment among key voter blocs? And how far away do you believe we are from climate change having a significant impact on the outcome of national and local elections?
Ooh, okay. So, well, certainly, like climate events already affect local elections. Like Hurricane Sandy in New York had an effect on local elections, and Katrina had effect on local elections. And sometimes it's just the disruption, and sometimes it's the realization that we need to take care of the environment, and so it changed the salience of that issue compared to, say, the cost of electricity. There have been, so when I started doing polling work in this space was 2001. And at that time, I was brought into a project on nuclear power. And the people who were running that project had a goal of building 400 nuclear power plants in the United States. There were 100. So I told them they didn't need me to do a poll. I could tell you what the answer is already. But it has been interesting to see the shifts in public opinion around nuclear and other issues, and around climate change. So back in 2001, probably about half of Republicans held the view that climate change wasn't real, and that's dropped away. We don't see that anymore. Like only about less than 10% of people in the United States think that climate change isn't real. Huge change. Republicans are, a majority of Republicans now think that it's real and we should do something about it. So it's not the case that public attitudes from 25 years ago are just the same and people are polarized on this. There's been a shift. The question are distributional questions about who's going to pay the cost, how things are going to get borne out, what can we do for coal industry. Like state of Wyoming is terrified that like they're going to lose all the revenues. State of what are we going to do about the natural gas industry? And those are issues that we just haven't thought through yet. So I think when we start to have a more serious public engagement around this nationally, we'll have kind of a better sense of the path forward. But right now, I think people don't see what the path forward is, and that's where there's a need for some leadership. And I think we've started to see that really on both sides.
And a little
Yeah.
different perspective from the clinical perspective. In medicine, increasingly doctors are starting to talk to their patients about climate change and sort of making that connection of, your allergies are worse. The pollen season is longer than it used to be because of climate change. And if we think back, buckling your seatbelt used to be a controversial thing for doctors to talk to their patients about. Smoking. And so I think that's not the solution to changing public opinion, but I think it is a piece of it, right? To get normalized as something that affects everybody and it's real.
One thing I would add, and it's following up on what Steve said, is that if you think about the effect of climate change on election, I would suggest broadening the aperture to what climate change actually means. Climate change means all of the things that are associated with it, the stuff Mary's talking about, but also the politics of the energy transition. And if you think of climate change as being part of the energy transition and debates about that, we've seen that affect elections in a big way already. Rob, and then we're going to wrap up.
So it seems oftentimes economists are the skunk at the garden party. So this may be one of those.
This is why I'm invited to the garden party.
That there's a very important difference between seat belts and from education and change of norms, people deciding to not resist, to use them, being supportive. And I'll take another example, which is cigarette consumption, that those are cases in which taking action as an individual is good for you. 100% of the benefits of your not smoking go to you.
Not 100%, no.
Okay, so,
Secondhand smoke.
okay,
In fact, no, but Rob, that's a really important issue because that's how the smoking bans came to be.
No,
It was
why-
because of this. Other people.
I was being hyperbolic. The vast,
Economist.
the vast majority of the benefits are in terms of human health to you. It can affect others if you're an indoor area of secondary exposure to cigarette smoke, which I've studied. But the point is that with cigarette smoke and with seat belts, it directly affects you. With climate change, as a result of your taking action, you'll incur 100% of the costs, whatever those costs are, getting a better vehicle that doesn't use as much gasoline, going to other technologies in your home, whatever it is. But the benefits, because this is a global commons phenomenon, are spread globally. Think about the geographic arithmetic. The benefits that go to the individual in terms of reduced risk of climate change are minuscule. And that's why it's a problem. That's why we're here. That's why public policies are required. It's not simply education, and it's not, which it can be in some cases. And it's why it's a terrible, challenging problem. It's also, if I can elevate it to one higher level, it's also why individual countries on their own cannot deal with the problem because they incur the costs, but the benefits are distributed globally. So there's an incentive for all countries to free ride on the benefits of others, which is why with localized air pollution, even with acid rain, which is transboundary, we didn't need an international organization. We didn't need the United Nations. But in the case of climate change, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the Paris Agreement, et cetera, are absolutely essential because individual countries on their own are not going to do the job.
I suspect there's a lot to unpack there, but we are now transitioning to the second part of our program. So one of the things that we're doing in the Salata Institute is we are increasing our activities and engagement with you and your colleagues, the alumni of Harvard. And so we have Peter Tufano is going to lead a discussion with some distinguished Harvard alumni who are associated with the Salata Institute. Peter is a professor at the business school. Peter's a professor at the business school, and among the very many things he's done, he's been the dean of the Said School of Business at Oxford for 10 years, and he is now a senior advisor to the Salata Institute, and he is leading our alumni engagement activities. Peter.
So welcome everybody to your reunion. Last year was my reunion. I college business school and GSAS, so I have lots of reunions, and I was sitting right in your seats. So Jim asked a really interesting and important question, like why climate, why now, and why Harvard? Let me ask a simpler question. Who's Harvard? So you saw together 5 faculty members out of the 2,300 faculty members at Harvard. And certainly we are Harvard, and the research you heard has to underpin and undergird everything that we do. But there's another 2,700 that are researchers. So, okay, that's Harvard. How about the 25,000 students? They're Harvard, for sure. But then there's this other group too, and it's the 400,000 of you. We're all Harvard. So yes, it is true that the researchers here have to generate these new ideas, but if you think about the mission of the Salata Institute, and it is to develop and promote effective, durable, and equitable climate solutions. Well, we can do great research, we can do great teaching, but promoting and developing these solutions, that's partially your job. You're the ones who are in government. You're the ones who are in front of classrooms. You're the ones who are in business. You're the ones who are working on nonprofit boards and volunteering. So if we're actually going to develop and promote to try to get tons in lives, well, then we can't do this just sitting in Cambridge, Massachusetts, or even across the river in Soldiers Field Road. We have to actually work closely in hand with you. So that's why an important element of the Salata Institute is engaging with you, supporting you, trying to make you more effective in what you do. And so in that spirit, Jim asked if I would take on this role of working with our alums, and I gladly did it because as I said, I'm one of you as well as a faculty member here at the school. But what exactly does that mean? What do alumni do in the climate space? How many of you have heard of HACE? Okay, that's great. How many of you have heard of Class Acts? A couple of you, great. You're going to learn more about both of those things. Before there was a Salata Institute in 2022, actually the alumni came together and formed HACE. And that was the Harvard Alumni for Climate and Entrepreneurship, and that was 2020, I believe. And well before that, in 2013, Harvard alumni got together to form Class Acts. The first Class Act was class of 73. And those Class Acts, and you'll hear more about them, they are not just about climate, but they are about alumni working together. And so what you're going to hear from these 2 amazing people down here, Michelle Faggart and Sandy Chen, are a little bit about what Class Act does and what HACE does, because you can join with them and they're going to join with us, and together we can make a difference. Some people might want to silence the research that's going on at the university. Some people may want to say that 1/4 of our students shouldn't be here, but no one can silence our alumni. And that is an important thing that we all have to remember. Or will they silence us? But with that, actually, let's hear about these organizations that some of you know, but others don't. Sandy, could you get us started? What is this thing called Class Acts? What are Class Acts doing in the climate space? And then tell us a little bit about what's happening right after this.
Thanks, Peter, and thank you, Salata Institute, for inviting us to be here. It's really an honor. So Class Act isn't a club. It's not a special interest group like HACE. What it is really a model or a framework for HR classes to really engage their classmates to work together on programs or projects that have a social benefit. And as Peter mentioned, this was a brainchild of the class of 73, when in anticipation of their 40th reunion, there was a groundswell of conversation and interest among the classmates of, hey, we have a lot of intellect, we have a lot of experience, and frankly, we have a lot of resources amongst us. We should apply all of that toward doing something good for society, to give back and to serve. And so they created this framework called Class Act. and they call themselves Class Act HR 73. Class Act stands for Class Acting, I got to get this right, Achieving Change Together. And that literally says it all. You know, with your classmates, you make change happen together. And in the past 5 to 6 years, Class Act HR 73 also has been really doing a tremendous job trying to get the word out about Class Act and have other classes adopt or engage in this model of getting their classmates together to do good things beyond their time at Harvard. I mean, we were told at commencement to go out and do good things for the world. So we're continuing to do that now as alumni through Class Act. There's probably at this point about 16 to 17 classes that have adopted Class Act or Class Act-like organizations. They choose to take on missions and goals and projects they wish. And it's not limited to climate and in the environment. In fact, some of the other popular categories are like social justice, economic equity, education, and right now in particular, popular is defending public and private universities, their rights and independence. So that's kind of been a popular topic right now. And the wonderful thing is it really is driven by your classmates and the class leaders in each group. So in terms of climate and the environment, it is popular because as we kind of Jim alluded to, it's not really that political, or it shouldn't be. So it does gain traction. And I don't know where we are on the slide. Oh, I'm supposed to drive this. Sorry. Forgot that. So you saw what I just told you about, right? That achieving change together and all that. And what I want to go on to is, oh, yay, here. You can explore what all the different class acts are doing by using that QR code. It's going to take you to a website that Class Act HR 73 has created and lists the various class acts that are really active now. Even though there are 16 other classes that have been, engaged in it, some have been more active than others. You'll get a really great idea of the kind of different things they're working on. And the other thing you can do is actually experience what class acts can do, especially when they work together. Right after this event, go across the street, across Oxford Street, and you will see an event that has been created by 4 class acts working with HACE. And what we wanted to do at this reunion was to tell the alumni, hey, there's a lot of great things your fellow alums are doing on climate action. Get inspired by it, learn from it, and then do some more of it yourself. So that was our goal. We have Jim coming to speak with us, as well as Heather Hendrickson, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer for Harvard. So she will be there too. It's going to be a really great opportunity to see what some of your fellow alums are doing. So I hope you'll consider coming right after this event over to Laurel Lecture Hall.
Thank you, Stan. Before you, because I think we're going to go to Michelle, and then we're probably going to have to close. Give me one thing that they're going to see, in the next event that's going to really be exciting.
Only one?
Just one. We don't have much time.
One thing that you'll see is, for example, Class Act 75 has been working on engaging with iLab and students there on some nonprofit organizations that are helping with climate adaptation, both in Africa and also in Arizona. I would say that's one. And since you only limited that.
One it is. So go next door at 4:15, 4:30. Michelle.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle Faggart. I have the honor of serving as one of the co-presidents of Harvard Alumni for Climate and the Environment. We are a shared interest group, part of the Harvard Alumni Association. We have a very vibrant and robust community worldwide of people who are passionate about climate and the environment. We're about 3,500, growing every day, but since you all are in this room, I expect everyone to be members by 4:15, so counting on you, seeing you soon. We do our work through three key pillars: education, community, and action. And thanks to our amazing management committee and leadership team, we're able to offer a number of different programs and ways to get involved. I'll just mention a few here, but please check out our website. We are, I think, officially now also on the Salata website, so you can find us all in one place. Just a few things that we offer. We've partnered with the Climate Reality Program, which is the organization that you may know Al Gore heads, to create a climate action training program. And we now have a continuing support group led by one of our volunteers, Brooke Suter, who helps bring your ideas to action. We have a monthly book club. Just to give you a taste, we did Braiding Sweetgrass last month, one of my favorite books if you haven't heard of it, led by another one of our wonderful volunteers, Kathy. We have in-person and virtual networking events. Just last month, in partnership with Salata, we had a in-person networking event at DC Climate Action Week, and then shortly after we had one in Nigeria. So we really are a global community. And then finally, I will mention that around some of these crucial international events, such as the Conference on Parties, the last panel mentioned the UNFCCC framework and the Paris Agreement, New York Climate Action Week. Our Harvard community is convening in these spaces and is leading in these spaces, and we create some of the platforms for them to connect, whether that's on Slack or WhatsApp or in person. And so just thank you to our amazing partners here and to other shared interest groups. Climate change is so intersectional that we're able to partner with so many different organizations. You can talk about any one of your passions and realize that climate is going to have an impact on it. So very much looking forward to seeing you at HACE events and at our many opportunities.
Great. So if you want to put this into context, Michelle said about 4,000 members of HACE. There are 400,000 Harvard alumni. What fraction of Harvard alumni should be engaged with climate? I think it's a number bigger than 1%. If we could get to 5%, that's 20,000 people. If we could get to 10%, that's 40,000 people. That's not to say that all those other alums are not engaged with climate, but I think we can get more done if we work together. We talked about supporting one another. It shouldn't be the case that alumni do things despite Harvard, or alumni are doing things with the benign neglect of Harvard, but we should be supporting one another. So Michelle just mentioned our website. As of yesterday, call it version 1.1 of the alumni page. Now, if you go there, you will find HASTE, you will find the Class X, you will find the stuff that you might be able to benefit from as an alumni, because we want to make it simpler for you. We're also going to send you out an email on Monday, maybe Tuesday. And what we're going to do is we're going to ask you to fill out a survey. We want to know what would be helpful to you. Not what would be helpful to us, but what would be helpful to you. What can we do to make alumni more effective in terms of climate action and climate leadership? How can we support organizations like this? So that's where we're headed. I've intentionally actually cut us a little short so we can take some questions. I'd like specifically questions here. I could do my questions, but I think it would be better here. Questions from the audience about what it is that these groups do, or what we can do together, or comments about what you'd like to see us do. Yes.
Working with Climate Reality, we've had 16,000 people globally come to the climate boot camp, 40% in the global south. I cannot tell you how interested these people are in understanding policy. We now have 17 hours of training, custom training, done in partnership with HACE, with Climate Reality, to let policymakers like myself, who never had any training in what do we do about the climate, get that survey course. You guys remember your survey courses? We have a Harvard level survey course in what do you do about the climate. We cannot keep up with the amount of interest that people come with no advertising. Mm-hmm. We have 300 people come from the Philippines, people from 139 countries. So the question I have is, I think Harvard's #1 capability is educating the people. What we see is a huge hunger out there to understand, what do we do about this? We're talking about the 4th industrial wave. We're not talking about climate change. We're talking about a fundamental change in how we do business in the world. Energy, this is like the Industrial Revolution. We substituted capital for labor. Now we're substituting capital for energy. When we do a presentation in India or in Africa, those people are hungry to know what will the next economy look like. The US is going to be bypassed, no question about it. We are now going to become England in the 1940s.
Well, thank you so much. We know that a Harvard alum has a lot to say because we're all so passionate about this topic. No apologies necessary. But let's just, Michelle, a success story. Tell us about what alumni have been doing that, some of the members of HASTE, because, this is to, kind of just reflect back to the great work that alumni can do in tons and lives.
Sure. Yeah, I'll just mention one quick event that just recently happened. So it's at the very top of my mind. But this was a hybrid event that we hosted. We had an in-person group in New York, an in-person group in Boston, and an online community. So a technological feat, if you will. And it was actually featuring some of the work from Dr. Rice's Center Sea Change. We had Dr. Caleb Dresser come and address an audience with the Harvard Frontline Clinic Toolkit. And so this was a preview of this amazing resource, which helps clinics and clinicians become more resilient and protect their patients. And then following his preview of this amazing resource, we had a physician in the Bahamas talk about how Dr. Latoya Storr, she talks about how she prepares her patients and her clinicians to be more resilient in the face of climate and climate disasters. And then following that, we had a networking opportunity for the in-person folks, for the virtual folks, to kind of process what they had learned and apply it to their own contexts. So I just wanted to highlight this as a success story because I think it perfectly embodies HASTE. It was global, local, virtual, in-person, featured cutting-edge research, but also allowed people the opportunity to process it. So if this is something that interests you, if you have a passion or a topic that you want to do something like this about, we have the infrastructure and we hope that you'll join us.
Sandy, one from you.
So I can't go to my class dinner tonight unless I at least mention that we think a success story for our Class Act HR 85 was that back in 2022, January, 4 months after Jim became Vice Provost, he was nice enough to meet with Class Act HR 85. And we went to him with our audacious statement that, hey, we think Harvard should be a climate leader. We as alumni think you should be doing more. And he, being that, Harvard economics professor, said, I agree with you, but I think I need data from more than just the 10 of you to convince my Harvard colleagues that we should be doing more. So being Harvard alumni, we did not back down from that challenge. We went out and surveyed 500 Harvard alumni and gathered data to assess, well, how do Harvard alumni think about climate change and what Harvard should be doing on it? So the two key takeaways we got that we really wanted to bring back to Harvard, because we thought it was important, among other things, was one, we found that over 80% of the survey responders said, we think Harvard has the skills, the know-how, they can make a noticeable impact on climate change. The second thing they said, over 80% said, and Harvard has the responsibility to do this. So we took that to Harvard. The second part of the, or nugget that we gleaned from the survey was, alumni said, you're underutilizing the alumni. You should connect and engage with alumni on climate action. And we think Harvard then would have a far greater impact and faster impact on climate change. And to Harvard's credits, Jim and other leaders at Harvard, and the shout out goes to the HAA and to the Office for Sustainability, as well as the Salata Institute, and also the Provost here. They listened. And it's programs like this that's happening at reunions. I think that was directly a result of us coming to them with data from Harvard alums saying, hey, we care. And we really want Harvard to do more. So when Salata Institute does surveys like this, like how can we help you? We do think that Class Act HR 85 had something to do with that.
Thank you so much.
So thanks so much. So thanks so much, Peter and Michelle and Sandy. And Sandy, you know, your work with HR 75, HR 85 has been, especially HR 85, has just been incredibly valuable. So this is, I will say she's pretty persistent and pretty compelling. You know, so thank you so much for coming. I hope you are able to go to Sandy's event coming up. I'd just like to leave you with a couple of thoughts. I mean, now more than ever, this is really a moment for us to think seriously and out of the box about climate solutions, durable climate solutions that are really going to make a difference across the country and across the globe. Now more than ever, it's an opportunity for us to think about how durable means technology solutions, durable means political solutions, durable means solutions that are going to appeal across the spectrum to folks throughout this country and across the world. And finally, this is now more than ever, this is an opportunity and this is a moment that Harvard really needs your help. The alumni are one of our greatest assets and greatest resources, and this is this is a tough time. This is a tough time for the university, and it's going to get worse, and we need you.